In the previous video, we looked at attack vectors for cross-site scripting, reflected cross-site scripting, and now we're actually going to look into how to protect your users against reflected XSS. So as we've seen, this is one of the most common ways hacker attack websites, and as I've said in the previous video, I'm not a big fan. I don't actually look for XSSs in my application security assessments or projects or pen tests, but I only look for the generic attack vectors because XSS to me is very uninteresting. Very, very uninteresting, and this is a very biased opinion of mine. I don't look for XSS, SQLi, XXC, and some other vulnerabilities. I particularly like access controls authorization issues because they have a lot of impact, SSRF, sensitive information disclosure, and I also do a lot of security code review, mostly JavaScript. That's my thing. And you have to have, if you're in cybersecurity, so for example, if you're into attacking, I'm also into cloud security as of recent, and I'm enjoying it like tremendously. So you have to have your own thing. You cannot be a jack of all trades. You simply cannot be a jack of all trades, and I'm kind of conflicting with myself saying this because I do like to juggle with a lot of stuff, but if you want to be really good at something, you can be really good at that something if you focus a lot of time on that something, and at the same time you can be moderately good at something else if you spend the rest of your... So say that you spend 80% of your time on the thing that you're mostly interested in, and 20% of your time, your career time, your skill time, your abilities time, your technical knowledge time, those other 20% is going to be, that other 20% is going to be spread all over the rest of your interests. So closing the parentheses here, XSS vulnerabilities permit a malicious user to execute arbitrary chunks of JavaScript. So one of the most common publicly reported security vulnerability, which is probably one of the reasons I don't like it. Prevalence is very common, exploitability is quite easy, impact harmful. Alright, so these are less dangerous than stored XSS, which actually cause a persistent problem when users visit a particular page. So XSS is more common than stored XSS. Reflected XSS is more common than stored XSS. Any page that takes a parameter from a GET or POST request and displays that parameter back to the user in some fashion is potentially at risk. Now, there are, so an attacker will spread these malicious URLs in emails, comment sections, or in forums, since the link points at the site of the user. So this is how attackers infect victims. Reflected vulnerabilities are easy to overlook in your code reviews, since the temptation is only to check code. So I would be more interested in finding reflected XSS via code reviews than via blindly throwing hundreds of thousands of uncompatible payloads at a parameter. So be particularly careful to check the following types of pages: search results, error pages, form submissions. Because in error pages, some search criteria can be displayed back to the user. So whether or not it is written in the page title or in the description or whatever, you must make sure that that is being escaped properly. Some error pages also reflect some of the input. If a malicious actor wants to break an application, they sometimes might cause an error via invalid input, and that invalid input might be reflected back in the error page. Now, through form submissions, there might be parts of the submission that is being displayed back to the user. You have to make sure that is escaped properly. Now, in the previous video, we've seen a malicious crafted GET request. So that doesn't actually mean that post requests should not be treated with the same seriosity, if that is a word. If you don't protect against cross-site request forgery, attackers can easily construct malicious post requests. And so in this case, they're talking about CSRF. Even if you do protect against CSRF or CSRF, attackers will often use a combination of vulnerabilities to construct poison post requests. Now, how do you protect? By escaping dynamic content. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we've seen this in the previous XSS video, which is, I believe, is part 2 and part 3, defenses. So I've spent like 20 minutes on this, so you might want to check it out. You escape dynamic content by replacing significant characters with their HTML entity encoding equivalents. Now, most modern frameworks will escape dynamic content by default, and we looked into examples. Like, they don't have the examples here, but we've looked into the examples in that third video over here. Whitelisting values, so we've also seen that if a URL expects a counter parameter in the URL, for instance, make sure that it is only permitted to take one of a list of valid enumerated values. So instead of having the user, or instead of allowing the user to input the name of the country, you can just have it pick it up from a list. And also in the backend, you need to make sure that the user isn't able, or anyone isn't able to tamper with that parameter. So if that parameter gets a different value outside of those possibly chosen values from the list, that value isn't going to be processed by the server. Now, most importantly, implement a CSP content security policy, and we've looked into details, into depth in previous videos. So content security policy is really interesting and important. All right, so if you want to go in depth with that, look in the previous video. So if you implement a CSP, an appropriate CSP, this will protect your users very effectively. So of course, it may take a considerable amount of discipline to make your site ready for such a header like this one in this situation. Inline script tags are considered best practices in modern development. Mixing content and code makes web applications difficult to maintain, but are common in older legacy websites. Now, you can migrate away from inline scripts by making CSP violation reports. So to your CSP, in your content security policy, you add a report URI directive, which actually is going to, whenever your policy is violated, the browser will actually notify you via the URI you're setting here, and this is actually going to be a post request. So rather than preventing inline JavaScript from executing. So in this situation, report URI example.com CSP CSR reports. Okay. This will give you reassurance that there are no lingering inline scripts before you ban them outright. Now, you can check further readings how cross-site scripting works from Acunetics, content security policy, which is a deep dive for any respectable cybersecurity professional, regardless of their color, of the color of their hat. So even if you're in red teaming or in blue teaming, when it comes to web application security, you should know what content security policy is, what it comprises of, how you can actually find flaws and exploit web vulnerabilities by flaws in CSP, and so on and so forth. Most importantly, so this is a blog, but most importantly, look into the Mozilla one here, which is much more thorough and insightful. Content security policy explained by NetSparker. Alright, so this being said, let's actually look into testing ourselves. Which is more dangerous, stored or reflected? Stored. Both can be very dangerous. What kind of pages are likely to contain reflected XSS vulnerabilities? Search pages, error pages. Or likely to contain reflected XSS? I mean, pages containing forms, yes they are. Search pages, yes they are. Static pages, likely not. Error pages, yes they are. So I believe if we can pick either of 1, 2, and 4 should be correct. Let's pick the error pages. True or false? You only really need to check pages that interact with your database for vulnerabilities. I would say it's false. Let's see. So we got all 3 right. Okay, now going back to the lessons, in the next video we're gonna look at DOM-based XSS. Not super excited, but I'm curious what it is about, and then really into file upload vulnerabilities. And I want to say that I check a lot in all my application security tests. There has to be some sort of or some type of file upload functionality that I need to test, and I'm really excited because probably in 70 to 80% of the cases I'm able to find some issue with that functionality. Now this video ends here.